13:1. The coffee had gone cold in my hands 20 minutes ago, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The phone lay face down on the kitchen table where I dropped it. It screamed black and silent, yet somehow still screaming those words at me. I'm bringing my mother-in-law instead. She's more fun. You always bring the mood down. 1 year 365 days of planning, saving, dreaming, every penny carefully set aside from my part-time job at the library. Every detail researched and re-researched. The cabin in the Smoky Mountains, the hiking trails I'd mapped out, the family recipes I'd planned to cook, the photo albums I'd organized to finally share those stories about their father that they never seemed to have time to hear. My name is Cherise Pitt, and at 58 I thought I understood disappointment. I thought I'd felt every shade of it during my marriage to Robert, through his drinking, his silences, his eventual departure when the boys were still in high school. I thought I'd mastered it during the lean years that followed, working double shifts while they finished school, watching them grow distant as they built their own lives. But this was different. This was surgical in its precision. I lifted the phone with trembling fingers and read the message again, as if the words might have rearranged themselves into something kinder. They hadn't. I'm bringing my mother-in-law instead. She's more fun. You always bring the mood down. The sender Will, my eldest, 28 years old, married to Chrissy Black for 3 years now. She of the perfect blonde highlights and the way of tilting her head when she spoke to me, as if I were a slow child who might not understand simple concepts. The irony wasn't lost on me. Chrissy's mother, Audrey Roberts, had been widowed just 2 years ago, the same length of time I'd been planning this trip. Audrey, who lived in a sprawling house in the suburbs, who took yoga classes and wine-tasting tours, who had what my son apparently considered fun money. Audrey, who had never worked a day in her life because her husband had left her comfortable, unlike Robert, who'd managed to drink away most of our savings before the divorce. I set the phone down and walked to the window above the sink. Outside, Miss Mariel Freeman from next door was pruning her roses, her silver hair catching the afternoon light. She looked up and waved, and I managed to wave back, though I wasn't sure how my arm moved. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in with their faded yellow paint, and the calendar that still showed last month because I'd forgotten to turn it. Everything about this house felt smaller. The life I'd built, the dreams I'd cultivated, the relationship with my sons that I'd convinced myself was healing. My phone buzzed again, another message, this time from my younger son, Ronald Dinkins Pitt. He'd kept my name when Will had chosen to take his stepfather's surname after Robert married his secretary. At 25, Ronald was supposedly the sensitive one, the one who still called on Sundays, who remembered my birthday. Mom, Will told me about the trip. Maybe it's for the best. You know how you get, when we're all together. How I get, as if grief were a personality flaw. As if the quiet that sometimes fell over me when I looked at my sons and saw their father's eyes, their father's stubborn chin, was something I chose rather than something that chose me. I deleted both messages without responding. The travel brochures were still spread across the dining room table like fallen leaves. Gatlinburg Gateway to Adventure, one proclaimed, showing a family of 4 hiking through dappled sunlight. I'd circled activities in red ink: horseback riding, the scenic chairlift, the distillery tour I'd thought might interest Will, the cabin rental confirmation sat beside them, paid in full 3 months ago, non-refundable. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the small notebook beside the brochures, filled with my careful handwriting, questions I'd wanted to ask them, stories I'd wanted to tell. Do you remember when your father taught you to fish at Lake Norris? Do you remember the Christmas when we had no money, but made decorations out of newspaper and you said it was the most beautiful tree you'd ever seen? Pages of memories I'd been hoarding for years, waiting for the right moment to share them. Waiting for a week, when they'd be trapped in a car with me, when they'd have to listen. When they might finally understand that their father hadn't always been the man who left. That there had been good times, that there had been love. I closed the notebook and felt something crack inside my chest. The phone rang, not a text this time, but an actual call. Will's name appeared on the screen, probably calling to explain, to soften the blow, to make sure I understood that this wasn't personal, that it was just practical, that Audrey was simply a better fit for the adventure they wanted to have. I let it ring 5 times, 6, 7, then I picked up. Hello Will, Mom. Hey, did you get my message? His voice was careful, the tone he used when he was about to deliver bad news to a client at his marketing firm, professional, detached, kind, but firm. Look, I know this is sudden, but Audrey's been having a really hard time since Dad died. Her husband, I corrected quietly. Her husband died, not her father. A pause. Right, her husband, and she's been so depressed. And when Chrissy mentioned the trip, she just lit up. She's never been to the mountains, and she has all these ideas about things to do. And honestly, Mom, you know how you get when we're all together for too long. There it was again, how I get. How do I get? Will, another pause. Longer this time. You know, quiet, sad. You start talking about Dad and it makes everyone uncomfortable. She's more upbeat, more fun to be around. The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully chosen, precisely aimed. I wondered if he'd practiced this conversation, if he'd discussed it with Chrissy, if they'd agreed that honesty was the best policy, that it was better to hurt me now than to endure my presence for a week. I see, Mom, don't be like that. It's not personal. It's just the dynamic would be better with Audrey. She's got great energy, and she's always up for anything. Remember last Christmas, when you fell asleep during the movie? I remembered working an extra shift at the library that day, so I could afford the presents under their tree. I remembered staying up until 2 in the morning, wrapping gifts and preparing the breakfast casserole that had been Robert's favorite. I remembered being so tired that I dozed off during the second hour of an action movie I'd never wanted to watch, and how they'd all laughed about it later. How it had become a family joke. Grandma Therese's Christmas nap. I understand, I said, and I meant it. I understood perfectly. So you're okay with this? I mean, I know you put a lot of work into planning everything, and I really appreciate it, but I'm okay with it. Really? Because you sound weird. I'm fine, Will. You and Ronald go with Audrey. Have a wonderful time. Are you being sarcastic? No, I hope you have fun. And I did. I hoped they would have exactly the kind of fun they deserved. After I hung up, I sat in the silence for a long time. The house felt different now, as if something had shifted in its foundation. The air tasted different. The light from the windows felt differently. I opened my laptop and began typing. First, I canceled the cabin reservation, forfeiting the deposit I'd saved for months to. Then, I canceled the restaurant reservations, the activity bookings, the rental car. One by one, I deleted every trace of the trip I'd planned, each cancellation confirmation appearing in my inbox like a small death certificate. Finally, I opened a new document and began to write. Dear Will and Ronald, I want you to know that I understand your decision completely. Audrey will indeed be much more fun than I would have been. She has energy and enthusiasm that I lack, and she won't burden you with sad stories or uncomfortable silence. I'm writing to let you know that I'll be making some changes in my life. I've realized that I've been holding on to expectations that aren't fair to any of us. You've both made it clear in different ways that my presence in your lives is more obligation than joy, and I want to free you from that burden. This isn't anger speaking, this is clarity. I love you both. I always will, but I'm going to start living for myself now in ways that might surprise you. All my love. Mom. I read it twice, then deleted it. They didn't deserve explanation. They didn't deserve advanced warning. Instead, I saved the document as the last invitation, and closed the laptop. Tomorrow I would begin the work of disappearing from their lives as gracefully as they had disappeared from mine. Tonight, I would sit in this quiet house, and let myself feel the full weight of what I'd lost. But first, I would pour myself a glass of wine and toast the end of hope, because sometimes the only way to heal is to stop trying to fix what was never meant to be repaired. The phone buzzed again. A text from Ronald. Mom, Will said you were okay with everything, but I just wanted to make sure. You're not upset, are you? I turned the phone face down without reading the rest. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky the color of old bruises. Miss Freeman had finished with her roses and gone inside, leaving the garden empty, except for the wind moving through the leaves. I had work to do. The first thing I did was stop answering their calls. It started 3 days after the mountain trip would have begun. Will called twice on Wednesday, probably realizing I hadn't sent my usual have fun text or asked for photos. Ronald called Thursday morning, then again Thursday evening. By Friday they were both calling multiple times a day, their voicemails growing progressively more confused, then concerned, then irritated. I listened to each message once, then deleted it. Mom, it's Will, just checking in. Call me back. Mom, it's Ronald. Are you okay? I'm starting to worry. Mom, this is getting weird. Why aren't you answering? Cherie, it's Will. I drove by your house and saw your car, so I know you're alive. What's going on? I was very much alive. More alive than I'd felt in years, actually. The silence in my house had transformed from empty to peaceful without the constant anticipation of their calls, their needs, their casual dismissals. I found myself noticing things I'd forgotten to see. The way morning light moved across my kitchen table, the sound of rain on the roof, the taste of coffee when I wasn't drinking it while listening to Will complain about his job or Ronald's relationship problems. On Saturday I drove to the bank and made some changes. Over the years I'd been helping both boys financially, never large amounts, but steady ones. Will's car payment when he was between jobs for 6 months, Ronald's credit card debt from his finding himself the emergency fund I'd maintained for them, adding $25 each month from my library salary for the past 5 years. I'd like to close this account, I told Janet Waters, the bank manager who'd known me for a decade, the emergency fund. But Charlize, you've been so consistent with it. Are you sure? I'm very sure. She processed the paperwork with the discreet efficiency of someone who'd learned not to ask too many questions. The balance was $47, almost enough to cover the cabin deposit I'd lost. I transferred it to my personal account and felt something settle in my chest. Would you like to set up automatic transfers to your son's accounts instead? Janet asked. Sometimes people find it easier to help family that way. No thank you, I won't be helping them anymore. Her eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. Of course. Is there anything else I can help you with today? Actually, yes, I'd like to set up a new savings account, something for travel. That afternoon, I visited the post office and rented a small box. Then, I went to the phone company and changed my number. The new number would be unlisted, and I would give it to exactly 3 people: my doctor, my employer, and Mrs. Freeman next door, who'd been bringing me soup when I was sick and borrowing my hedge trimmer for 2 years. The anticipation was delicious. I imagined Will's face when he called and heard the automated message, "The number you have dialed is not in service." I imagined Ronald's confusion, his growing panic. I imagined them finally understanding what it felt like to reach for someone who wasn't there. Sunday morning brought a pounding on my front door. I was in my bathrobe, reading the paper and eating actual breakfast instead of grabbing a granola bar while listening to voicemails. The knocking was insistent, demanding. "Mom, open the door, we know you're in there." Will's voice tight with frustration. I sipped my coffee and continued reading about the library's upcoming fundraiser. The knocking intensified. "Mom, come on, what's wrong with you? What was wrong with me?" As if seeking peace in my own home was a character defect, I walked to the front window and moved the curtain just enough to see them. Will stood on my porch in his expensive weekend clothes, his face red with indignation. Ronald lingered behind him, looking uncertain. Both of them had gotten my eyes, but Will had inherited his father's entitled stance, the way Robert used to stand when he was about to demand something he had no right to ask for. They saw me at the window. Will's expression shifted from anger to what he probably thought was concern. "Mom, please, we just want to talk." I let the curtain fall back into place and returned to my newspaper. The knocking stopped after 10 minutes. I heard their voices on the porch, Will's sharp with irritation, Ronald's softer, but no less frustrated. Car doors slammed, engines started, they drove away. I finished reading the paper, then opened my laptop and began researching. First, I looked up the cost of changing my locks. Then I researched home security system. Finally I began travel this time, but for solo adventures, river cruises, art tours in Europe, photography workshops in national parks. The phone rang, my landline, which I'd forgotten they had. I unplugged it from the wall. Monday at work I moved through my duties with unusual energy. I helped patrons find books, organized the return cart, and stayed late to help with the inventory. My colleague, Hazel Lang, noticed the change. "You seem different today," she said as we locked up. "Lighter somehow." "I made some changes over the weekend," I said. "Good change." "Well, whatever you did, keep doing it. You look 10 years younger." Tuesday brought a letter in my mailbox. Will's handwriting, careful and controlled. "Mom, I don't know what's going on, but this silent treatment is childish. We get that you're upset about the trip, but that's no reason to ignore us completely. Ronald is really worried, and frankly, so am I. You're being dramatic, and it's not fair. We have lives too. You know, we can't drop everything every time you decide to have a mood. Please call us." We need to talk about this like adults. Will, I read it twice, then opened my laptop and began typing. Will, thank you for your letter. I want to address a few points you raised. You're right that I'm upset about the trip, but not in the way you think. I'm not upset that you chose Audrey over me. I'm grateful. You did me a tremendous favor by showing me exactly how you see me, as someone who brings down the mood, someone whose presence is an obligation rather than a joy. You call this a silent treatment, but that implies punishment. This isn't punishment, this is acceptance. I'm accepting that I've been forcing my love on people who don't want it, and I'm stopping. You say I'm being dramatic, but I disagree. Drama requires an audience. I'm simply living quietly, which is apparently what you've wanted all along. You're concerned about my mood, but my mood is actually quite good. For the first time in years, I'm not walking on eggshells, not measuring my words, not apologizing for taking up space in my own life. You say you need to talk like adults. Adults respect boundaries. Adults don't pound on doors when they're not welcome. Adults don't demand access to someone who has clearly chosen distance. I'm not angry, Will. I'm done. Don't contact me again, either of you sure lies. I printed the letter, signed it, and walked to the mailbox. The evening air was cool against my skin, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd noticed the temperature, the way the wind moved through the trees, the sound of children playing in a yard down the street. Mrs. Freeman was watering her flowers. Evening, Charlize, she called. How are you feeling? You look different lately. I'm well, Mariel. Very well. Good to hear. You know, I've been thinking about taking a pottery class at the community center. Would you be interested in joining me? I paused. When was the last time someone had invited me to do something? When was the last time I'd said yes to an invitation that wasn't a family obligation? I'd like that very much. Wonderful. Classes start next week. I'll pick up the information tomorrow. As I walked back to my house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation for something that belonged entirely to me. Not a family dinner where I'd cook and clean and listen to complaints. Not a holiday gathering where I'd be tolerated rather than celebrated. Something chosen. Something mine. Inside, I made a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table with a notebook. Not the one filled with family memories and questions I'd never ask. A new one, blank, and waiting. At the top of the first page, I wrote things I want to do. The list came easier than I'd expected. Take that pottery class with Meryl. Visit the museum in Atlanta I'd always meant to see. Learn to cook food I actually like, not just what others expect. Plant a garden that doesn't have to feed anyone but me. Read books during the day without feeling guilty. Take a photography class. Travel somewhere I've never been. Sleep in on Sunday mornings. Eat breakfast in bed. Stop apologizing for existing. I was on the third page when I realized I was crying, not from sadness, but from something deeper. Relief maybe, or recognition. The woman writing this list was someone I'd lost track of years ago, someone who'd been buried under layers of duty and disappointment, and the constant effort to be enough for people who would never think I was enough. The phone rang again, the landline. I'd forgotten to keep unplugged. I looked at it for a long moment, then picked up the receiver and listened without speaking. Mom, I know you're there. Please, just talk to us. Ronald's voice, younger and more uncertain than Will's, but still carrying that familiar note of expectation, still assuming I would give in, that I would break first, that I would do what I'd always done, absorb their discomfort and make everything smooth again. Mom, Will's really sorry about what he said. We both are. Can't we go back to the way things were, where I existed at the margins of their lives, grateful for scraps of attention, grateful to be included, even when that inclusion came with conditions and criticism. Please, Mom, you're scaring us. I hung up without saying a word, then unplugged the phone again. Tomorrow, I would call the locksmith. Tomorrow, I would sign up for the pottery class. Tomorrow, I would continue the quiet work of building a life that didn't require anyone else's permission or approval. But tonight, I would finish my list and dream about the woman I was becoming. The woman who would never again beg for love from people who saw her as a burden. The woman who was done. The locksmith arrived at 8 in the morning, a weathered man named Lloyd Hardy, who didn't ask questions when I told him I wanted every lock in the house changed. He worked efficiently, the sound of his drill echoing through rooms that felt more mine with each turn of the screws. You want me to install a deadbolt on the back door too? He asked, testing the new front lock. Yes, and a security chain. He nodded, understanding something in my tone that didn't require explanation. Smart thinking. You living alone? Yes, and I intend to keep it that way. When he finished, I paid him in cash, and held the new keys in my palm like small victories. The house felt different already. Sealed, protected. Mine in a way it hadn't been since Robert left. No one could walk in anymore expecting welcome. No one could demand entry to my space, my peace, my life. The pottery class, that evening, was held in the basement of the community center, a fluorescent lit room that smelled of clay and possibility. Mariel had saved me a seat at a table near the window, and as we settled in with our aprons and tools, I felt something I'd almost forgot, the simple pleasure of learning something new without having to justify the time or expense to anyone. I haven't done anything like this since high school, Mariel confessed, poking at her lump of clay. Richard always said crafts were a waste of time. What do you think? I asked, working the clay between my fingers. I think Richard had a lot of opinions about things that weren't his business. Our instructor, a patient woman named Lily Jackson, who wore her gray hair in a practical bun, demonstrated the basics of centering clay on the wood. I watched her hands move with quiet confidence, shaping something beautiful from something formless, and felt an unexpected kinship. The key, Lily said, is not to fight the clay. You have to work with its nature, not against it. I thought about that as I attempted my first bowl, my hands learning the delicate balance between control and surrender. The clay responded to gentle pressure, crumpled under force, like trust. I realized, like relationships, like life itself. You're a natural, Mariel observed, watching my bowl take shape. 13-2 He's hoping the threat of legal action will be enough to force me back into compliance. What do you want from me, Mrs. Pitt? I want you to explain to my son that mental competency evaluations are for people who can't manage their own affairs, not for people who choose to manage them differently than their families would prefer. I want you to tell him that cutting off contact with family members who treat you poorly is not a sign of illness. It's a sign of self-respect. He nodded slowly. I think I can do that. And Mr. Wright, if my son tries to pursue this further, if he continues to harass me or my employer, I'll be filing harassment charges. I have documentation of every contact attempt, every violation of the boundaries I've clearly established. I may be older, but I'm not helpless. And I'm not afraid of him anymore. I stood to leave, then turned back. One more thing. The next time someone tells you their family member is acting crazy for wanting independence, you might ask why that family member feels the need to escape. Walking out of that office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. Not the borrowed power that came from being needed or feared, but the clean, clear power that came from knowing exactly who I was and what I would and wouldn't accept. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number as I reached my car. This is Audrey Roberts. Will gave me your number. I think we should talk. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. I have nothing to say to you. Her response came immediately. I think you'll change your mind when you hear what really happened on that trip. I sat in my car for 5 minutes, engine running, air conditioning humming. Whatever Audrey wanted to tell me, it couldn't change anything. The damage was done, the bridges burned. I had moved beyond caring about their justifications or explanations. But curiosity was a stubborn thing, and sometimes the truth was worth hearing, even when it came too late to matter. I typed back 10 minutes, public place, the coffee shop on Maple Street, 1 Aaron. I'll be there. As I drove home, I wondered what new piece of this puzzle Audrey thought she held, what secret she believed would change everything, what truth she thought I needed to hear. But I knew, with the cold certainty that had been growing in me for weeks, that nothing she could say would bring me back. Some doors, once closed, were meant to stay that. Still, I would listen, not because I hoped for reconciliation, but because understanding the full scope of their betrayal would only strengthen my resolve. The woman I was becoming didn't hide from hard truths. She collected them like weapons, sharp and useful, and Audrey Roberts was already seated when I arrived at the coffee shop, her manicured hands wrapped around a white ceramic mug. She looked exactly as I remembered, blonde highlights perfectly maintained, skin that spoke of expensive facials and careful sun protection, clothes that whispered wealth without shouting it. Everything about her screamed comfortable widowhood, the kind that came with life insurance policies and investment portfolios that her husband had managed until his convenient death. She looked up when I approached, and I saw something unexpected in her eyes. Guilt arise, Thank you for coming. I sat across from her without ordering anything. You have 10 minutes. I need to tell you what really happened on the trip. What Will and Chrissy said about you. I know what they said. Will was quite clear in his messages. No. She shook her head. Her perfectly styled hair barely moved. You don't know all of it. You don't know what Chrissy said to me in private. What she's been saying about you for months. I waited. Audrey's composure was cracking around the edges, her confidence wavering like a candle in wind. She told me you were becoming difficult, that you were demanding too much attention, calling too often, making them feel guilty for having their own lives. She painted a picture of a lonely, needy mother who couldn't let go. The words should have hurt. A week ago they would have sent me spiraling into self-doubt. Now they just confirmed what I'd already suspected. And you believed her at first. Yes, it seemed to fit what I saw when we were all together. You were quiet. Sometimes sad. Chrissy said it was because you couldn't accept that the boys had grown up, that you were trying to guilt them into spending more time with you. How convenient for everyone involved. Audrey flinched. But then I heard the conversation between Will and Chrissy on the trip. The night after we'd been hiking, when they thought I was asleep in the next room. She paused, seeming to gather courage. Whatever she'd heard, it had shaken her carefully constructed worldview. Chrissy was laughing about how easy it had been to manipulate the situation. She said she'd been working on Will for months, planting little seeds about how embarrassing you were, how much better their social life would be if you weren't always hanging around the edges of. The coffee shop seemed to grow quieter around us, as if the universe was leaning in to hear this confession. She said you reminded her of a stray dog that wouldn't stop following them around, hoping for scraps. And Will laughed. He said it was cruel but accurate. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not shock, but confirmation. The casual cruelty I'd sensed, but never been able to name, finally given words. There's more, Audrey continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. She told Will that getting rid of you was just the first step, that once you were out of the picture, they could focus on more important relationships, people who could actually help them professionally and socially. People like you. Yes. People like me. She looked down at her hands. People with money and connections, and the right kind of social standing. Chrissy had researched my finances. Shiraz. She knew exactly how much my husband had left me. She'd been planning this for months. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. This hadn't been a spontaneous decision to include Audrey in the trip. It had been a calculated campaign to replace me with someone more valuable, someone who could offer them something beyond love and history and the inconvenient memories of their father. And what did you get out of telling me this, Audrey? What's your angle here? She looked up, surprised by the edge in my voice. I don't have an angle. I felt sick after hearing them talk about you that way. About anyone that way. Sick enough to cut the trip short. Sick enough to tell them their behavior was unacceptable. No, she admitted. I stayed the full week. I let them wine and dine me. Let Chrissy show me around their social circle. Let Will pitch me his investment ideas. Because it benefited you. Because I was lonely, she said. And for the first time her perfect composure cracked complete. Because my husband died and left me with more money than I know what to do with. And children who live across the country and see me twice a year. Because when two attractive young people paid attention to me, made me feel useful and wanted, I let myself believe it was real. And now I know better. The morning after I heard that conversation, Chrissy started her real pitch. Investment opportunities. A chance to become a family investor in Will's marketing firm, help them buy a bigger house, contribute to their future children's education funds, all presented as ways to become part of their family. The waitress refilled Audrey's coffee without being asked, a small kindness that seemed to steady her. I realized I was being cultivated, groomed, the same way they'd been systematically pushing you out. They were pulling me in, and the only difference between us was my bank account. So, you decided to develop a conscience. I decided I didn't want to be the kind of person who profits from someone else's pain. I studied her face, looking for the lie, the manipulation, the angle she was still hiding. But all I saw was a woman who'd looked into a mirror and not liked what she'd found there. What do you want from me, Audrey? I want to make it right. I want to help you. I don't need your help. I don't need anyone's help. You might change your mind when you hear the rest of it. I should have left then. I should have walked away from whatever new revelation she was offering, whatever deeper betrayal she was about to expose. But that cold, curious part of me that had been growing stronger each day, wanted to know, wanted to understand the full scope of what I'd been up against. Go on. They're planning to contest your father's will. The words hit like a physical blow. What? Robert's will. Will hired a lawyer to look into it. Apparently there's a clause about mental competency that could be triggered if you're declared unfit to manage your own affairs. My father had died 2 years ago, leaving me his small house in the mountains, and a modest savings account. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine, the only inheritance I'd ever received. The only security I had beyond my library job and social security. They can't do that. The will was probated years ago. Not if they can prove you were under duress when you inherited or if you've become incompetent since then. Will thinks the competency evaluation he was threatening could serve double duty. The full picture was emerging now, ugly and complete. The trip rejection hadn't been spontaneous cruel. It had been part of a larger plan. Push me to an emotional breaking point. Document my unstable behavior. Use it to challenge my inheritance while simultaneously positioning Audrey as the new family benefactor. How long have they been planning? Chrissy mentioned it started after your father's funeral. She noticed how withdrawn you were, how you struggled with grief, and saw an opportunity. She convinced Will that you were becoming a liability emotionally and financially, and the competency evaluation was always about the inheritance. The family concern was just window dressing. I sat back in my chair processing the scope of the betrayal, not just emotional abandonment, but financial predation, not just rejection, but calculated theft. Why are you telling me this, Audrey? Really? Because I've been where you are. Not exactly, but close enough. My husband's children from his first marriage tried something similar after he died. They couldn't challenge the will directly, so they tried to prove I'd manipulated him into changing it. They failed. But the process was educational. Educational. How? I learned that people will convince themselves of anything if there's money involved. That family loyalty is often just another word for financial dependency. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people is to remove the temptation to exploit you. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. This is my attorney, Sarah Wilson. She specializes in estate law and elder protection. She knows all the tricks Will's lawyer might try, because she stopped them before. I took the card but didn't look at. What do you get out of this, Audrey? What's your real end game here? Peace of mind. And maybe if you'll let me a chance to be the kind of friend I should have been from the beginning. I don't need friends. I don't need anyone. Maybe not, but I need to know that I didn't just walk away when I could have helped. That I didn't let them destroy someone else the way they were planning to use me. I stood to leave, the business card heavy in my hand. Shurs? Audrey called as I reached the door. There's one more thing the lawyer Will hired. He's been in contact with the library board. He's questioning your competency to handle the children's programs, suggesting that your recent erratic behavior might make you unsuitable for working with vulnerable populations. My job. They were coming for my job. Now, I turned back to face her and whatever expression crossed my face made her shrink back in her chair. Now I'm angry, I said quietly. Before this I was just done. Now I'm angry. Good, she said. Angry is useful. Angry gets things done. I walked out of the coffee shop into the bright afternoon sun, my mind already working, calculating, planning. They thought they could take everything from me, my family, my inheritance, my livelihood. They thought they could erase me piece by piece until nothing remained but a grateful ghost who would fade away quietly. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. The woman I'd been would have crumbled under this assault. The woman I was becoming was going to fight back with everything she had. And everything she had was more than they'd ever imagined. The first call I made was to Sarah Wilson, Audrey's attorney. Her voice was crisp, professional, tinged with the kind of controlled fury that came from seeing the same patterns of elder abuse repeated endlessly. Audrey briefed me on your situation, she said after I'd introduced myself. I've already pulled Will's lawyer's filing. Sloppy work based on assumptions rather than evidence. We can stop this, but we need to move quickly. What do you need from medical records showing cognitive competency, financial records proving you're managing your affairs responsibly, character witnesses, and most importantly, documentation of their harassment and attempted manipulation. I have 3 years of texts, emails and voicemails. Everything good. Bring everything to my office tomorrow morning. We're going to make this very expensive for them to pursue. The second call was to my doctor requesting a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. The third was to my bank arranging for a complete financial audit. By evening I had appointments scheduled for every piece of evidence I'd need to prove that not only was I competent, I was more financially responsible than either of my sons had ever been, but documentation was just defense. I wanted a fence. The next morning I sat in Sarah's office, watching her review the evidence I'd compiled. Her expression grew more satisfied with each page. "This is beautiful," she said, holding up a particularly damning text from Will, asking for money while simultaneously criticizing my emotional neediness. "They've manipulation. Any judge looking at this pattern will see exactly what's been happening." "What about my job?" "The library board already handled. I contacted them this morning. Apparently Will's lawyer made a serious mistake. He implied that you were under investigation for misconduct without any actual evidence." The board was not amused. "They're considering filing a complaint with the Bar Association for harassment." Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by something sharper, satisfaction. "Now," Sarah continued, "let's talk about what you want the outcome to be. We can stop their legal challenges easily, but you seem like someone who might want to go further." I thought about that. A week ago I would have been content just to be left alone. Now, after learning the full scope of their betrayal, I wanted something more complete. I want them to understand that actions have consequences, that you can't treat people like disposable objects without paying a price. I can work with that. Tell me about their finance. Over the next hour I outlined everything I knew about Will and Ronald's financial situations. Will's marketing firm that was leveraged to the hilt, dependent on a few major clients. Ronald's graduate school debt and his job at a non-profit that barely covered his expenses. Their mortgages, car payments, the lifestyle they maintained through credit, and my occasional assistance. "Interesting," Sarah mused. "And they've been counting on your father's inheritance to improve their situation." Will specifically mentioned using it as collateral for a business expansion loan. "Well, that's not going to happen. In fact, I think we can make their financial situation considerably more complicated." She explained the strategy with the methodical precision of someone who understood that the best revenge was often perfectly legal. A cease and desist order documenting their harassment, a demand for repayment of all the money I'd lent them over the years with interest, a formal complaint to Will's professional licensing board about his use of legal threats to intimidate a family member, a letter to their mortgage companies and creditors documenting the failed inheritance challenge. "The beauty of it," Sarah said, "is that it's all legit. You have every right to demand repayment of debts. Their harassment is documented. Their attempted legal manipulation is a matter of public record. We're not destroying them, we're simply removing the safety net they took for granted." "How long will it take?" "The initial paperwork goes out today. They'll have 30 days to respond to the debt collection. The professional complaints take longer, but they'll have immediate impacts on their reputations." I signed the papers with a steady hand, each signature feeling like a small act of reclamation. That afternoon I drove to the cemetery where my father was buried. I hadn't visited since the funeral, hadn't been able to face the weight of grief and memory that lived there, but today I needed to tell him what his inheritance had really meant, and what I was doing to protect it. His headstone was simple granite, worn smooth by 2 years of weather. I sat on the bench nearby and spoke to him as if he were listening. "They thought they could take what you left me, Dad. They thought I was too weak, too broken to fight back. But you didn't raise a weak woman. You just raised one who forgot her own strength for a while." The wind moved through the oak trees above his grave, and I chose to interpret it as approval. My phone buzzed. A text from Will. "Mom, we need to talk. My lawyer says you've hired someone. This is getting out of hand." I typed back, "Your lawyer is correct. Mine will be in touch soon. Do not contact me again." His response came immediately. "You're making a huge mistake. We're family." "No, Will, family doesn't treat each other like investments to be managed or obstacles to be removed. Family doesn't try to steal from each other. Family doesn't weaponize the legal system against vulnerable members. You're not my family anymore. You're just two men who share some DNA and a lot of regret." I turned off the phone and sat with my father in the growing dusk, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, complete peace with my choices. 3 weeks later I was in my pottery class when Sarah called with an update. Will had withdrawn his competency petition and formally apologized to the library board. Ronald had sent a check for half of what he owed me along with a payment plan for the rest. Chrissy had filed for divorce. The professional complaint is still pending, Sarah reported. But Will's lost 2 major clients already. Word travels fast in business circles when someone's reputation for ethics comes into question, and Ronald's scared. His nonprofit is very sensitive to any hint of scandal among employees. He's been asking through intermediaries if there's any way to resolve this quietly. There is. He pays back every penny with interest. And he never contacts me again. Same terms for Will. I'll communicate that. After she hung up, I sat with my clay working it between my fingers until it was perfectly centered. Lily had been right about not fighting the material's nature. Some things needed to be shaped gently, others needed to be broken down completely before they could become something new. Mariel looked over at my bowl, now tall and elegant with thin walls that caught the light. You've gotten so good at this, she said. It's like you found your natural medium. I thought about that as I added the finishing touches. Maybe she was right. Maybe the last few months had been about learning to work with my own nature instead of against it. Learning that strength could be quiet, that boundaries could be beautiful, that some relationships were like badly thrown clay, better scraped off the wheel and started fresh than endlessly repaired. That evening Audrey came by with a bottle of wine and a peace offering, a small ceramic planter she'd made in her own pottery class. I heard the good news, she said. Sarah told me Will dropped everything. He did. Chrissy left him too, apparently. Turns out she was only interested in the successful version of Will, not the one facing professional sanctions and debt collection. We sat on my back porch watching the sunset over Mariel's roses. The wine was good, the company surprisingly comfortable. I owe you an apology, Audrey said, after a while, for believing their version of you, for participating in their plan, even unwittingly. You don't owe me anything. You told me the truth when it mattered. Still, I should have seen through it soon. Should have asked myself why 2 people would be so eager to push their own mother away. Because they never saw me as their mother. They saw me as an obligation, a burden, a resource to be managed. And when I stopped being useful, they tried to replace me with someone who could offer them more. Their loss. Yes, I said, and meant it completely. Their loss. We sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell around us. In the distance I could hear music from someone's backyard party, laughter and conversation that spoke of connections freely chosen rather than demanded by blood or obligation. What will you do now? Audrey asked. Live, I said simply. I'm going to live exactly the way I want to without permission or apology. I'm going to travel places I've always wanted to see. I'm going to learn new things. I'm going to surround myself with people who choose to be in my life, not people who feel trapped by duty. That sounds lonely. No, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Lonely is spending years begging for love from people who see you as a burden. This is freedom. My phone sat silent on the table beside us, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd checked it compulsively, hoping for a call or text that might indicate I mattered to someone. I mattered to myself now. That was enough. You know what I realized? I said as Audrey prepared to leave. They did me a favor by showing me exactly who they are, exactly how they see me. They freed me to become who I was always meant to be. And who is that? I smiled, thinking of the woman who'd sat in this same spot 6 weeks ago, broken and begging for scraps of affection from people who would never value her. She felt like a stranger now. Someone I'd known once but had outgrown completely. Someone who doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. Someone who doesn't apologize for taking up space. Someone who knows the difference between being alone and being lonely. After Audrey left, I sat on my porch until the stars came out, planning the trip I would take with the money I'd saved for their mountain adventure. Rome. Or Scotland. Somewhere I'd never been. Somewhere that belonged entirely to me. Tomorrow I would call the travel agent. Tonight I would sit in the perfect silence of a life finally completely my own. In the distance Mariel's porch light came on and she waved from her window.